You did some time to get careful. Left hand, you didn't like the way your hand was in the morning.
Excuse me, is this thing on?
Whoa.
Yeah.
Excuse me.
You're welcome.
Guitar up.
1,
Turn
2,
that guitar
3.
up.
Hi, and welcome to In the Studio. I'm Redbeard, bringing you the stories behind the making of the greatest rock albums in history. Today, we'll go in the studio with a progressive rock group that was able to achieve widespread success without compromising its musical ideals.
I've seen all good people turn their heads each day, so satisfied I'm on my way.
And I think that was a good thing about the Yes Group. He would never take no for an answer.
I've seen all good people turn their heads each day, so satisfied I'm on my way.
Isn't that a good line? Hi, this is Jon Anderson, and you're in the studio for the Yes album.
Of all the bands that came to the forefront in the so-called progressive rock movement of the early 70s, none found more critical and commercial success than Yes. A number of bands, such as King Crimson and John McLaughlin's Mahavishnu Orchestra, were incorporating jazz and classical influences into rock and roll, creating enormously complicated pieces of music, experimenting with new instrumentation and electronic sounds. When the Yes album was released in March 1971, it was hailed as a shining example of this new kind of art rock. There were no 3-minute pop ditties on this record. Instead, it was a collection of longer musical pieces, almost symphonic in their construction. What distinguished Yes from the other progressive rock bands was that the grandeur of the music never obscured the melody of the songs. Jon Anderson's unmistakably clear singing voice gave Yes a focal point, a lyrical framework strong enough to support the band's dazzling musicianship. It was Anderson and bass player Chris Squire who founded Yes in 1968, and from the beginning, Squire and Anderson were an unlikely alliance, different in almost every single way. As a boy in suburban London, Chris Squire had been in one of England's best-known youth choirs, but his musical attention soon turned to rock and roll and London's nightclub scene. Chris haunted clubs like the Marquee and the Speakeasy, places that had spawned such acts as Cream and The Who. At 6'5" and with a penchant for black clothing, Squire seemed to embody the dark side of rock and roll. Anderson, by contrast, was interested in more spiritual matters, in astrology, the seeking of cosmic truth. And his musical taste tended to lean toward pop bands like the Fifth Dimension. As Anderson told me, it was because of their differences that they worked so well together.
I'm very energetic and very fast and very furious and smaller than Chris. He's sort of, he's taller, slower, more concise. Decisions out of Chris take a long time, but when they come, he sticks through them, you know, which is a great thing for Chris. I think that a lot of the musical things over the years would have gone too light. But for Chris sort of brings it back down to earth because of his Pisces, and he has that sort of earth-water energy, you know. It does take a long time to get things coordinated in his mind, but I think that's a very good sort of situation because I tend to just fly away like crazy. I come up with ideas like very fast. But it's always been, in a way, a little battle between me and Chris as to how it all finishes up, how it all turns out. Me with a zillion ideas and him with a more decisive point of view.
Together, they began writing music that challenged traditional boundaries, intricate songs, often containing a number of separate musical themes. And then there was the way Squire used his bass as a lead instrument. It was startling the first time we heard it, and it became a trademark of the Yes sound.
But I remember when we rehearsed that song, Yours Is No Disgrace, it was a group activity and it became an instrumental piece of music, far and above just a song. It was maybe 2/3 instrumental and the other third was the song. And we're on tour now and we're doing that song, and it really has survived the years very, very well.
Yesterday a morning came, a smile upon your face. Caesar's palace, morning glory, silly human race. On a sailing ship to nowhere, leaving any place. If the summer changed to winter, yours is no disgrace. Yours is no disgrace. Yours is no disgrace. death-defying, mutilated armies gather near, crawling out of dirty holes. Their morals disappear. Yesterday, a morning came, a smile upon your face. Caesar's palace, morning glory, silly human, silly human, silly human race. On a sailing ship to nowhere, leaving any place. If the summer changed to winter, yours is no disgrace. Yours is no disgrace. Yours is no disgrace. Battleships confide in me and tell me where you are. Shining, flying, purple wolf, come show me where you are. Lost in summer, morning, winter, travel very far. Lost in losing circumstances, that's just where you are.
That was Yours Is No Disgrace, the Yes album's opening cut. Here's Jon Anderson.
These musical emblems within just one song. And once we'd done that, we knew that any song that came around at that time, we would do the same thing. We would sort of make it into 2 or 3 parts, as a matter of course. I was listening then very much to the pop classics, the Stravinsky, New World Symphonies. A lot of structure was sort of coming through into the Yes music because I'd learnt it through listening to the classics. So I'd understand why it calmed down, why did it go quiet there, why it developed, and all of a sudden, bam, it was back in again, and then it quietened down. The 1812 Overture gets to a peak 3 times and then quietens down, and it sort of breathes, if you like.
Coming up next, we'll find out more about the Yes album and find out how Jon and Chris recruited Yes's original lineup when we come back in the studio.
Hi, this is Tony Kaye, and you're in the studio for the Yes album.
And I'm Redbeard. Welcome back. When Jon Anderson and Chris Squire went looking for musicians who could add to their musical vision, they started with guitarist Peter Banks, who'd been a part of Squire's former band, The Sin. The hardest part was finding players who cared as much about musical integrity as they did about having a hit. Here's Jon Anderson.
If I look back in those days, there was a certain element of, well, if you go to America and you do well, in a way, you're sort of selling out and you have your hit records and things like that, and nobody will love you in England ever again. And strangely, we held on to the musical side of the group as our sort of armour against that sort of possibility where the business would try to manipulate you and tell you, okay, well, you've had your hit records, you've got to make more hit records. No, we sort of said, no, we were going to carry on making albums. We are making an album's worth of music that we can perform on stage. And we really kept to that sort of attitude. It didn't rub very well with everybody, especially in the business side. Or some critics at times started to say, well, who do you think you are, you know, doing long pieces of music and stuff like that. But me and Chris initially decided that we wouldn't be too much of a here today, gone tomorrow band. We wanted to do something a little bit more creative. And we were very lucky. We seemed to keep bumping into the right musicians at the right time to join the group and to make it solid, you know.
They bumped into the man who would become Yes's first drummer from a newspaper ad.
Bill Bruford, he was advertising in the Melody Maker, and it's a very sort of typical story. I rang him up, me and Chris rang him and said, you know, you play drums? And he said, yeah, I'm a good drummer. So the only way we knew which was a good drummer was if he had a Ludwig kit, if he had if he had a drum kit called Ludwig. So we said, do you play Ludwig? And he said, yeah, of course I do. And I think what he did, he quickly sprayed his sonar kit black to look like a Ludwig, you see. So when he came to do a sort of a audition, if you like, it looked like a Ludwig kit. But he was a good player, you see. So that worked pretty well. And he had a car, which helped. I mean, it was only a Mini. It was a very small car. He said it was his, actually. It was a girlfriend of his. But then he was in the group, right? He was in the group before we met him. And then we got Tony Kaye, very groovy guy. I'd met Tony 4 years before in Leicester, or was it Manchester? So we sort of knew each other, and Pete Banks was there. And he was already with Chris in a group called Mabel Greer's Toy Shop. So the first thing I said to Chris was, maybe we should change the name.
Good idea. With the recruitment of Banks, Bruford, and Tony Kaye on keyboards, they had the lineup that would record the first two Yes albums in 1969 and 1970. Although those albums relied heavily on other people's material, the unorthodox arrangements was a sign of things to come. Yes was getting a reputation in England as an innovative and energetic new band. Here's bass player and Yes co-founder Chris Squire.
I must say a lot of it was down to the energy of Bill Bruford, because initially any band is only as active and creative and as good as its drummer. That's where it all starts. And he kind of like was a very much a driving force in that period. That influence on Yes was a very good one. He was a particularly good influence on me.
By 1969, Yes found itself in the forefront of London's rapidly growing art rock scene. It had taken a couple of breaks to get there, such as getting the opening slot for Cream's farewell concert at the Royal Albert Hall. Tony Kaye remembers that period as an exciting but difficult time.
For instance, at the beginning, we did covers of other people's songs, like the Beatles thing and the Crosby, Stills and Nash thing, and a couple of other America and that kind of stuff. And we just put it into a different musical ballpark, really, and embellished it and made it more symphonic and more instrumental. And I guess although the first two albums didn't really reflect, you know, what was coming. It was like the start of the way that we were thinking, and up until the Yes album, it was just kind of trying to do, you know, something different, really, and playing to English audiences who, in a way, for most part, was pretty much of an uphill battle. It was really start of another era where bands, you know, like the Nice and early Genesis were really trying to do something different. I guess we were trying to catch onto something that we really didn't know what it was going to be, but we wanted to push it in another direction. And the first two albums were obviously not successful, even in England. It was fortunately it was a time where you could go through three albums, and the record company kind of let you go on.
I was very lucky because when I first started working with Chris and Tony and Peter and Bill, there was definitely a feeling that we were all experimenting. It was a very, very great time in London for experimenting around 68, 69. The five major bands that came out of that time were King Crimson, ELP, Yes, Zeppelin, Deep Purple. These were groups of people that, unbeknown to themselves, were doing very, very similar activity. It was like nobody really knew what each other groups were doing. It just happens that around that period of time, everybody was sort of setting the sort of stall, the sort of theatre for the early 70s kind of music, which in a way came over from England to America.
As exciting as that time was in London, the scene could be intimidating to an up-and-coming band. Jon Anderson remembers a couple of times when the members of Yes realized just how far they had to go.
In 68, we were sort of the local band in London that was spoken about very well. And then we went to the Speakeasy one night and we heard this band was playing called King Crimson. And we said, okay, well, let's check them out, see how good they are. And they were great. They seriously were great. And we all sort of, big gloom, we had a big cloud over us for about a week, trying to get over the fact that they were better than us, or more ingenuitive. They were more, very similar attitude to music, but more well organized. And that pushed the group on, it made them work harder. And when we saw Mahavishnu, it made the band work harder. And I think that was a good thing about the Yes group, that it would never take no for an answer. Isn't that a good line?
for you. Take what I say in a different way, and it's easy to say that this is all confusion. As I see every day in me, I can also show it you, and you may follow.
That was Starship Trooper, a song with 3 distinct movements written by 3 different members of Yes. But the guitarist was not Peter Banks. It was somebody new whose first work with Yes was on this album. And when we come back, we'll find out who it was. I'm Redbeard, and you're in the studio with the Yes album. Welcome back to In the Studio, this week focusing on the Yes album. I'm Redbeard. Guitarist Peter Banks left Yes in 1970 before the recording of the Yes album. His replacement was Steve Howe. Here's Jon Anderson.
When Steve Howe joined the group, it made us more musical. Our scope was more musical. Peter Banks, very good guitar player, but his scope was sort of limited at times. Where when Steve came in, we had all this sort of Baroque attitude to music and some very classical trained attitude to music, country and western. Steve could really jump from one thing to another very fast, very talented man. I actually saw him a month before we actually got together, and I went to the speakeasy and he was playing, and I remember walking right past him underneath the stage and just looking at this guy with this beautiful guitar playing so many notes and so clear, singing away with his guitar. And I remembered that I thought he was very, very, very clear in his style. And then his name came up a month later, and I said, well, if he'll join, let's go for it. And he did join. It was definitely a good move for him. It was a good move for the group. He enjoyed himself immensely. And obviously, when you're happy, your music gets better. And he got better and better within that first couple of months of rehearsal. Me and Steve became very close. We had very similar attitudes to making music, so we'd sit down and write songs without any effort. And music actually is effortless. The more clear the combination of people, it isn't hard to make music. That's the fact. And we really enjoyed recording the Yes album. It didn't take too long. What we really wanted to do was to get on the road and show this new guy off,
Tony Kaye.
I was probably one of the first people in the band to have heard Steve. Yes, he was playing in a band that used to play at a club that I used to frequent very often. I think it was called Bodast, and it was mainly it wasn't that progressive. It was mainly a rock and roll band. I saw Steve play, and I thought, this guy's really got something else. But he was playing in a band that was really quite a raunchy rock and roll band, which is something that I kind of wanted for the band at that time. As soon as he came into the band, he went into a different mode and started playing much more progressive guitar than this kind of raunchy player that I remembered. So it was kind of strange. Although for the Yes album it was fine, but on from that, probably for me it was the conflict between keyboards and guitar was too much of a conflict, really. Although that was the direction that Yes was going, a lot of notes. And although the Yes album turned really to be quite a simple album in many respects, considering where Yes went on to from there.
Tony Kaye left Yes in 1971, following the American tour to support the Yes album. Kaye would go on from there to play with David Bowie and Badfinger, and to form his own group, Badger. And in 1983, 12 years after he left, Tony Kaye rejoined Yes. A dozen different people have been members of Yes, and only Chris Squire has managed to appear on every Yes album. But if you ask Jon Anderson how the band managed to survive so many changes and so many years, Anderson says it's because they never lost track of the melody.
The idea of strong melody came from one classical composer called Stravinsky. Stravinsky made music which was being made by lots of people, very similar kind of music, very avant-garde, but he retained something that they didn't, and that was the melodies. And if you listen to any Stravinsky, he holds it all together with melody. And I never wanted to lose that, so I was more of the melodious type, where the guys in the band would be often running on ideas figurative licks. Out of that, I realized that if it all went that way, we'd have a Mahavishnu of sorts. And yes, wasn't as good as that kind of sorts. It was what it was within itself, and it needed a voice, or voices. I think that's what we always tried to make sure we wanted, was a lot of harmony. Me, Steve and Chris singing together had a certain texture, and we worked on that all the way through that period of time. During the course of songs like I've Seen All Good People, it was a definite idea to have a developing quiet song and then just break open into a full church organ sort of thing, and grandiose, very, very big, massive in fact. Let's get the cathedral choir in there and that kind of thing. And it was a very sort of strong feeling about making it very grand, and then it can go into nothing, and out of that nothing comes a drum roll, and then into this funky down, da 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 da, which is on record is very light, very, very. I think it's played by acoustic guitar, most of it, and then the guitar solo comes in electric. By then, you see, we were very getting into the actual production side of things. We'd left it to other people before. I remember when we were doing I've Seen All Good People, your move was do-do, do-do, like a syncopated, but the thing was that I remember someone coming in, a famous producer, saying, "Why don't you put a bass line in, or something like that?" I said, "No, it's got to have nothing there. It's just got to go ba-da, like that, like a heartbeat, And so we were very, very adamant about what we were trying to do as a group. We were trying to do something a little bit different.
They certainly were successful at that, and to their surprise, they were just as successful in getting audiences to respond to their music. As the music of Yes became more complex, as the songs grew longer, some people feared that audiences wouldn't be willing to sit through it. But that's not what happened. Instead, Yes became one of the rock's most popular concert attractions, particularly in America. The audiences weren't afraid of experimentation. They welcomed it.
There was that combination of this is the way we're going, so you better hang in with it, because we don't know where we're going. We just want to change things a little bit, And the audiences were doing it as well. Audiences were willing to sit and listen to Long Distance Run Around, Yours Is No Disgrace, Heart of the Sunrise, music that really lasted longer than the norm. I think they were definitely more able to release their joy of what they heard. I mean, they wouldn't sit there and wait until the end of the song and then clap and cheer. When they'd do it halfway through, and really that was so new to us. And I think that the audiences that came to see us in that first 2 or 3 years inspired us to do Close to the Edge and Topographic, and made us want to do these very longer, how can I explain it, different way of looking at music. We just hoped that the audiences would like it. That was the thing to go for. You just say, well, this will really make them sit up and listen or something. And for the first few times we played these pieces of music, it was sort of a blank out there, just saying, I wonder if you like them, because the album had just come out and we were out there touring. But within about a month, they all started to somehow just sing along with them. And all of a sudden we realized that, well, if they're willing to go this way, this is great, because this is where we want to go. And I think this is really what it's all about, that you try out ideas on yourself first and foremost. And if you really appreciate them, then you release it to the audiences. And you hope that somebody out there likes what you're trying to do. And if they do, then you follow through and do some more of it.
I've seen all good people turn their heads each day, so satisfied I'm on my way. I've seen all good people turn their heads each day, so satisfied I'm on my way.
Take a straight and stronger course to the corner of your
See how good people turn their heads each day, so satisfied I'm on my way. I see how good people turn their heads each day, so satisfied I'm on my way. See all good people turn their heads each day, so satisfied I'm on my way. I see all good people turn their heads each day, so satisfied I'm on my way. I see all good people turn their heads each day, so satisfied I'm on my way. I see all good people turn their heads each day, so satisfied I'm on my way. I see all good people turn their heads each day, so satisfied.
I've Seen All Good People, written by Jon Anderson and Chris Squire. We'll be right back in the studio after this. I'm Redbeard, and I'd like to thank Chris Squire, Tony Kaye, and Jon Anderson of Yes. And a special thanks to Tony Dimitriades and Robert Richards. In the Studio is a Bullet production, produced by yours truly, Redbeard, and written by Joe Rose. Our tape editor was Doug Hall, and production assistance and digital mastering by Rick R.J. Lane. The executive producer of In the Studio is Stephen R. Smith.